Welcome to our webinar, Adaptive Strategic Execution for a Complex World. I'm Jonathan Gilbert. I'm the Vice President of Product Development for Strategy Execution and the lead for the development of the Adaptive Strategy Execution Program. I'm excited to be joined today by my colleagues here in Durham, North Carolina from Duke Corporate Education. Strategy Execution recently partnered with Duke Corporate Education, and together we're excited to launch a new program, the Adaptive Strategic Execution Program, which we'll cover later in the program. Let's talk about what we're going to be talking about today. We will start out diving into the world of project-based work. We'll look at some facts, a lot of facts, figures, and challenges that come from that. We'll also talk about a framework that we have developed as a partnership. As we look at adaptive strategic execution, we will look at the power of our partnership between Strategy Execution and Duke Corporate Education. We'll then take a look at the answer that we've developed to the challenges that we've talked about previously around adaptive strategic execution. So we'll take a look at some of the things, some of the courses that we've got in the program. And then finally, we will have a question and answer session. At the end of this session, I just want to point out, make sure that everybody understands this, we'll be hosting a Q&A, and we want to hear from you as much as we possibly can. So please use the chat questions feature in your control panel to submit questions, and we'll answer as many as we can. With that, I'm delighted to present my partner, Dr. Tony O'Driscoll from Duke University's VUCA School of Business and Head of Strategic Leadership Solutions for Duke Corporate Education. Tony is responsible for leading global development solutions focused on getting leaders ready for what's next. So thank you, Tony, for joining me today.
Jonathan, pleasure to welcome you here to our Durham campus. It's nice to meet everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And we're really excited to talk about project management in general, where we think it's going from the work we've done together, our partnership, and the program itself. So I think you being here is just another visible and tangible point that we are indeed working together.
Yes, we are.
To solve these problems.
Yep. Thank you so much for having me.
What I'd like to do first, as Jonathan said, is talk a little bit about the facts, figures, and challenges that we face. So as we got together, Jonathan and I have been working together for quite some time now, since October, I suppose, to really get into what are the core issues we're facing. And so what I'd like to do is not go over all of the different reports and books and research papers that we crawled into. These are just a couple that are probably most salient to our discussion today, but essentially dig into that data a little bit with some good news, with some not so good news, and then really clarifying the challenge that you and I both know we've built this program around. So it's always good to start with good news, I think.
Absolutely.
Let's go to the good news. What we know, Jonathan, is that project-oriented economic activity at the macroeconomic level around the world is big and growing. So in 2013, PMI did a study on their job and talent study, and they found out that fully 1/5 of the world's economy is project-based. It's about $12 trillion in 2013. Their new report, the Job and Talent Report, came out this year. It moves up now to just over $20 trillion. So over the 14 years from 2013 to 2027, there's going to be a 68% growth, macroeconomically speaking, in project-based work. A lot of it in Asia, India and China. As you know from your background, they're doing a lot of construction.
Yep.
So construction obviously is a big driver here. Pharmaceutical is a big driver. IT is a big driver. So it's worldwide, and it's not just contained in one industry. It's also becoming more diverse into a number of other industries. So if you're watching this webinar contemplating a role in leading projects, in managing projects, the macroeconomic trends are pretty good.
Looking good.
Now the second thing is, if the macroeconomic trends are good, what does it mean in terms of just the actual people doing the work? Well, same talent report from PMI, 65.9 million people in doing this project role-oriented work today. If we go out just a decade, 2027, we're up to 87.
Wow.
So over the next decade, we're going to increase 33%. Now for us, those of us in the business of developing leaders for what's next at VUCA and in your focus on strategy execution, just to put that in context, we need to build 2.2 million leaders per year in this arena for the next 10 years. So this is not something where we're worrying about hunkering down. This is kind of full speed ahead as fast as you can go.
This is good news.
It is good news. So the trends are solid in terms of the role, the increasingly important role that project-based work is playing in general. Now, if you go inside the company for a second, and I know you know my history at IBM.
Yes.
When we started the PC business, we started it as a project in Boca Raton, as far away from Armonk as we possibly could.
Absolutely.
Because it was a project.
Mm-hmm.
And projects, we keep off the main books, and we try to just run them as experiments and see how it goes. And it went pretty well, and then it got absorbed into the company, and obviously then my mother still asked me to fix the PC, even though we sold that to Lenovo. So what we're seeing is project-based work is worming its way into the organization in a much more visible way. Evidence to suggest that that's the case. In the 2013 study from PwC, 97% of the survey of the respondents said that project management is critical to business performance and organizational success, and 94% said it was critical to growth. So what that means is projects are no longer the things you run off the books and variable costs, but they're actually becoming core. And if you think about it, IT implementations are pretty much project run. When I worked at IBM, the bulk of the work was project run. It wasn't run in function. So it's increasingly important to organizations today.
Yep.
So what do we learn? Number one, macroeconomic speaking, growing. Number two, lots of jobs. Number three, increasingly important for organizations today.
Absolutely.
All good news.
And we are seeing these kinds of trends also within the strategy execution business as well, with all the different folks coming through the
it probably correlates
programs.
with your own growth and your own
business. Yeah.
So that's all good. Good now. But hold on. Back in 2010, and I don't want to keep referring back to my time at IBM, but back in 2010, there was a CEO study called Capitalizing on Complexity that started to, it's kind of credited with recognizing the beginning trend of this increased complexity and volatility inside of business, and how are we going to deal with it. So at that time, 64% of the CEOs, this is a huge survey, 400 CEOs around the world, said their businesses were more volatile, complex, and uncertain, and that was worrying to them. Moreover, they said over the next 5 years, they anticipated that it would become more complex, not less. Now we're back in 2010, so we're to 2015. And in 2015, what they said was, we don't think we can handle it.
So let's see if we get this straight. There's a trend in increasing complexity within the organizations, but yet the CEOs are saying, we don't know that we can handle it. And the data is pretty clear there.
Yeah. So I know the problem. I'm not convinced that I can handle it.
That's exactly.
See what I mean?
Yes.
So this, obviously a lot of people point back to this IBM study, but today you can't read a CEO study where they're not talking about complex, how to deal with complexity. That's the very challenge they're facing. And why are they worried about it? The reason they're worried about it is, in a complex world, your ability to execute strategy is diminished. Why? Because the environment is less predictable. So you might have to re-vector strategy. You might have to reallocate capital. There's all these different things. Disruption could come along and undermine your business model.
Yep.
Michael Dell just recently announced to the IT industry that his partnership with EMC, now that he's taken his company private, where you can do what he wants, is going to redefine the business model for cloud. Right. You bet that HP, Microsoft, IBM, and others are now having to completely re-vector what they plan to do because there's been a disruption in the environment. And that's how things are. So here's their pressure. They know that if they can move fast and respond, or even be the disruptor, the complexity can be a source of opportunity.
And one of the challenges that I've seen in organizations in my work with complexity is that a lot of organizations won't even recognize the fact or admit that it is a complex world, because that means then that they don't have as much control.
Correct. And so this becomes a leadership challenge, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is acknowledging that very fact. So they recognize that there's opportunity in complexity if I can move fast and execute. In fact, 88% of them say the biggest issue is strategy execution, implementing a strategy, right? However, unfortunately, we call this the strategy execution gap. This came from EIU, the Economist Intelligence Unit. 61% of them don't think they're up to the task of doing it. And they're right. You know why they're right? Because the evidence suggests it. Jonathan?
Lots of evidence, lots of data.
44% of strategic initiatives, this is PwC's latest PMO study, have not been successful. So what you have now is a company that's trying to respond in a far more agile way to unforeseen shifts in the market. And their ability to execute is pretty poor.
Yeah, it is. It's paltry.
So there's a strategy execution issue brought about by the shift and the turmoil in the environment. So now, how do I deal with that if I'm a CEO? Well, gosh, if I'm trying to implement strategy and guess project-based work is coming into the organization more, well, heck, maybe project-based work might be the way to launch and deliver strategic initiatives. So now it's going from being in the backwater in Boca Raton to being core and central to the strategic imperatives of the business.
Through project-based work.
So here's what's happening. They know that they need to close the strategy execution gap, and they're looking more and more to significant organization change and effective program management to get there. Evidence of that? In 2016, again, PwC's Portfolio and Program Management Study, which is probably the biggest one that looks at this. In 2016, 38% of the projects that were underway in organizations of those responded were strategic. Not tactical, but strategic. In 1 year, it's grown to 50%.
Wow.
So executives are relying more on project-based work to deliver strategic initiatives.
And this is true in your organization. I know it's true in mine.
Yeah.
Everybody is now working on strategic initiatives. So all of the project-based work for all of the people in the organization virtually is all around the strategic initiatives. It's probably more than that in a lot of organizations.
And you know, a lot of times in the past you could work through geography or function through hierarchy and drive in a very linear process. And that's within your own enterprise. The issue now is that the boundaries of enterprise are pretty permeable, and so projects are running cross-enterprise.
That's right.
And they're strategic. So it's just becoming much more complex, which is what we're finding out.
Yep.
If you look at projects today, two studies here, the Pulse on the Profession from PMI and the Navigating Complexity report, is that when they surveyed all of their membership, they said the nature of projects in your business, are they highly complex, low complexity, or medium? 41% are high complex, meaning that's the biggest share of the pie. The bulk of the projects today are high complexity. Now here's the second kicker to that. Those projects that are high complexity, guess what? They cost twice as much. Right. Therefore, they have more risk associated with them. You know, you're playing a bigger bet.
And as we, just one other question here. Are we going to somewhere in our conversation talk about how we define high complexity?
We will.
Good.
I actually have the data that shows what does a high complexity project.
Of course you have data.
Yeah. It's all about the data, man.
It is. It is.
Okay, so here we are. What are we saying? We're saying the project-based work is on the rise. We're saying, but the work itself is becoming more complex. And we're saying that now CEOs are betting on project-based work to get strategic initiatives executed because the strategy execution gap is too high. 61% of them didn't feel that they could execute, so now they're looking for project-based work. So now the question is, how's it doing? How is the project-based implementation of strategic initiatives going? Well, guess what? You know the answer? And the answer is not great. About a quarter of those strategic initiatives that are project-based, that are led in a project-based way, are failing outright. Not just kind of not meeting scope, budget, and time, but they're failing outright. So we've got an issue. Now, is this as bad as the 44% for regular strategic? Not, but still, those of us in this field, we wouldn't be happy with that kind of outcome.
That's right.
You know, 1 in 4 is not working at all. So we have this is the beginning of the challenge section. While project management's on the rise, while project leadership is more important from a strategic perspective inside of companies,
we're not ready for it.
We need to do something different in order to deliver the full potential of what we can do in a world that's increasingly complex. Okay?
Yep.
So what do we have to do? Well, guess what? We have to become more adaptable. That's the reason. You were asking this earlier. So if you look at, PMI did a study on navigating complexity, and they said the companies that are successful in dealing with highly complex projects, how do they do it, right? And so one thing was, what is the nature of those projects? What are the characteristics?
Right.
The things that really trip people up are the fact that these projects, because they're more complex, have way more stakeholders than you might have in the past. And secondly, there's just way more ambiguity surrounding the project from a scope, from a budget, from a timing, from a re-vectoring perspective than what we're used to. Those two are the clearly top winners. There's a list of 13, but those two, if you can solve those two, you're solving a whole bunch of the issue.
And so multiple stakeholders means
inside the organization, outside the organization, many more interfaces, many more requirements, and so you're pleasing many masters.
Okay.
And maybe you don't know who's boss.
Okay.
So you have kind of conflicting data on who's on first and what's priority.
Right.
Which is interesting because if you look at the other side at projects and what fails, the number one reason that these complex projects fail is because reprioritization. Everything gets reprioritized all the time, so we're having a great time going around in circles.
Okay.
Or if we're not just reprioritizing and focus, we're actually having to shift the strategy. Like IBM and HP today are actually going to have to shift their strategy as a result of what Michael Dell said. So now everything has to change. Everything is now being reformulated and has to be readjusted.
So requiring adaptability, which is
Correct.
the same thing as agility to a certain extent.
Yeah, agility is the outcome. Adaptability is the way to get there.
Exactly.
That's why we call it the adaptive strategic execution. Adaptability is what's required in order for the organization to be agile, in order to be able to sense and respond to these changes.
Exactly. Which is a very, very strong and important part of why we're together, because we both have the point of view that this particular statement right here is what our program is going to be all about.
100%. I mean, we basically laid out the evidence that says, look, if we can create a more adaptable project leadership capability on a global scale, we might continue to fail at a 25% rate in delivering the strategic initiatives that companies need to succeed. That's just unacceptable, and that's why this partnership.
Yes.
Okay. So what do we have to do? What does the journey towards adaptive strategic execution look like? Right? Well, you have to start where you're at. So where do we start? We start where we're at with when we managed projects in the past, we were structured and orderly and disciplined. Of course we were. That's what we have to do. However, if the world we're operating in is complex and not complicated and not as predictable as it was, it's an and. We need to have that structure and discipline, and we need to be able to allow for spontaneity and some disorganization. Project management and disorganization, how does that go together? You have to deal with it. 25% of work activity today, PMI data, is classified as ad hoc and unplanned. I didn't know. Did you know what you were going to do? You knew you had a webinar today at noon and at 7, but in between we didn't know what was going to go on. And you read your email and you were doing something you didn't know you were doing. Yeah, that's the nature of work today. It's far more emergent. So we have to be able to accommodate both structured, orderly, and disciplined, and deal with the tension of having to deal with spontaneity and disorganization. We rely heavily on plans, and we'll have to continue to do that. But as we know, in an emergent context that's complex, you have to evolve the plan, right? Yes. Sometimes that's called scope creep, and that's known to be bad. However, in this context, we have to know where do you really draw the line. And so it's the same contours, but we're just pushing the edges a little bit.
Right. Got it.
Next one is the world that we operated in traditionally was predictable and well-defined. It was easy. Let's just make an extra 10% next year on revenues. Sound good to you?
That sounds good. Let's do that.
Now, well, if you're in IT and Michael Dell drops a bomb on you as he did, or some pharmaceutical company comes up with a new patent that's going to blow away your blockbuster drug, you are not in control of your destiny as much as you used to in the past. Or some government throws up a regulatory barrier that's going to stop you from making money. There's all these reasons why the world's not as predictable as it was, and you need to be able to accommodate that if you're implementing strategic initiatives. The world is volatile, chaotic. It's not an unwavering environment. No. We're not standing on solid ground anymore. We're navigating ships and sands, and we have to accommodate that reality as we plan for strategy. The technology one's interesting. In a way, technology is the thing that's driving a lot of this complexity, and in another way, we use technology as project leaders to get work done. And sometimes we're implementing technology to support a change initiative in the business. All three of those technological levers are shifting because technology is shifting really fast.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
Yep. Agreed.
Last one, realistic schedule. We all like that. And the way that we kept count was, did I get it on time, under budget, and in scope? Absolutely, that's still critical, but is the thing that I'm working on that's on time and on budget and scope still relevant to the strategic intent of the business? And should I have killed it sooner? These are the tough questions we're going to have to be asking.
Absolutely, and at the bottom of this slide, really what we're saying is that, as you've mentioned, all of the things in the center of this slide aren't going away. We still need to do them in order to address the things around the edges. So again, it's not an either or.
No.
It's a both and that's really a mindset shift that people in project-based work need to have.
It's almost like the middle is the core of what we've always done.
Right.
The environment is causing us. It's like it's causing us to. It's pulling us in all directions. I think of it almost like Gumby, right? But our propensity, back to your mindset, is to fall back to the middle and work harder. We call that falling into default. I'm just going to plan harder.
Yeah.
I'm just going to tighten my schedule. And unfortunately, that is a little bit like trying to play tennis with a golf club. You see what I mean? The tool is not suited to the reality. So the leadership element that we're going to be teaching in this program is how to recognize what's right in that end. At what level do you have to actually move toward in order to optimize strategy execution and get that 25% down.
So you're still swinging something.
Yeah, but
you're trying to hit something.
Working really hard, but you're not going to.
Yeah.
Certainly, if I'm playing you in tennis, even if I have a tennis club or a tennis bat, I'm not going to win. So as we looked at this landscape, and you know this well because we work together, we've identified what we're calling the framework. The framework. Right? Adaptive Strategic Execution Framework.
Yes.
In the middle is the self. I'm the leader at a project level, at a program level, at an initiative level, at a strategic level. And I used to operate in a world that was static, defined, and directed. Well, that world's blown open now. So from a strategy perspective, strategy is no longer formulated in a static world. It's formulated in a dynamic and unpredictable world.
Right.
What that means is strategy is going to either be reconfigured, re-vectored, or reformulated in a far faster, at a far faster clip than it has before. Work itself used to be clearly defined in function and role, and this is what you do. Well, now work is much more emergent and interdependent within and across organizations, right? And projects tend to span across organizations a lot. And finally, the people themselves who do the work used to sit inside functional hierarchies or geographic hierarchies, and you could just tell them what to do. Well, now the work is far more collaborative and interconnected than it used to be. So what that means is, as a project leader, you may not control the resources. You have to influence. You have to engage. Engagement scores across the board inside organizations today are below 20%. People are not feeling engaged in the work, and that's a very key aspect, particularly the more complex work becomes. It's a leadership aspect of it. So those are the three domains, right? The strategy domain that's moving from A to B, the work domain that's moving from A to B, the people domain that's moving from A to B, and what leaders need to do is understand how to navigate that complex landscape, right?
Yes, absolutely, and that's what brought us together.
It's exactly what brought us together.
Our point of view, and
now you get to my favorite part of the data, right? Of all this stuff when we've been studying it, this is my favorite part of the data. If you ask, what is the single most important thing to deal with this challenge? If there's one thing you could do, the answer is leadership skills. This is not a tool problem. This is not a process problem. This is a leadership challenge. Leaders need to do something more, better, or differently today than they have in the past in order to close the strategy gap. And that's why our program's about mindset, skill set,
and tool set. So all three of these, mindset, tool set, and skill set. But leaders still can deploy tools.
100%.
They can still deploy skills. But underneath all of that is this mindset of navigating complexity.
100%. That's exactly it. So you're not sitting in that white circle anymore. So you have to expand the mindset to understand where. A lot of people say, Jonathan, that the most important currency in the world is time. Everybody, it's time. We're time. It's not. Everybody has the same amount of time. It's where you spend attention that matters. So what we know about leadership is knowing when and where to spend the right attention on what issue. That's where you really get leverage. Understanding the complexity of the issues you're dealing with and knowing where to place attention to pull together the skill set and tool set, that's what you're going to get out of this book.
Absolutely. Yes, attention is much more critical than time, and that's what we're finding out as well. Absolutely.
So what have we learned? We've learned that project-based work is becoming increasingly pervasive. That's great.
Yes.
And important to businesses. That's really cool. But business is becoming more complex. This complexity is negatively impacting strategy execution. So people are saying, well, let's try project-based work, which means project-based work is becoming more complex and more costly, therefore more risky. And project-based work in its current incarnation is not closing the strategy execution gap as it should. The way to address it is that you have to navigate that complexity by building agility into the system. The way you build agility into the system is building the right skills in leaders. That's our story, and we're sticking to it.
Sticking with it, absolutely.
Fair enough?
Yes, sir. Good deal.
So why don't we just dive into the framework just a little bit, and then that'll set up what we'd like to talk about with the partnership.
With the partnership and then the courses, absolutely.
There I am, happy. 10, 20 years ago, I had my Gantt chart on the wall, left to right with my critical path, and it never changed. Yep. That is in the world today. So from a strategy perspective, we're going from static to dynamic, which means that everything's getting revectored and reconfigured. From a work perspective, 25% of the work is out. I just don't even know. And for me, I don't know. 50 to 60% of my work is, the higher up you go, the less predictable your work activity will be on any given day. And finally, you have far less control of the people resource than you had in the past. So when you had a functional hierarchy, it was easy to manage this. Now there's a lot more of a people component to manage.
Yeah. Plus, all the people are self-organizing around all this emergent work.
Absolutely.
Because the strategy is shifting.
100%.
Yep.
And so sometimes even back in the 80s, there was, in the research on leadership, there was a question about middle management. Does it matter? Are middle managers dinosaurs or dynamos? Because if IT can just take care of the coordination costs of a middle manager, they're non-value added. They're just relaying information. They're just relay switches. Do we need them? The answer is we do need them.
We do. Matter of fact, we have a slide in one of the first courses that's been developed around the architect, the translator, and the doer. And it's all about that middle, and the middle's expanding.
The middle's expanding, and the ability of that translator to translate not just down but also up is absolutely critical. Yep. So that's the landscape. If you look at the landscape, what we're going to do now is kind of provide some more data for why did we shape the courses the way we did. If you look at the complex environment, the two characteristics I mentioned to you before, number one is multiple stakeholders. So the thing that's different today than before about complex projects that is number one on people's list is you have to deal with so many more stakeholders. Yeah. So the leadership challenge is how do you manage stakeholder relationships, know which ones to manage, which ones are critical to make sure that the project even gets off the ground in the first place, because you have a much wider array of actors on the team, right? The second is the ambiguity of the project. So how do you make sense of the complexity of the thing to know where to spend your attention? Those are the two kind of big sense-making things that a leader needs to understand how to do. Got it? Yep. From a strategy perspective, we know that 62% of the initiatives have a clear link between objectives and strategy. Now that sounds good. Wow, 62%. What that means is 38% don't. Like, what are we doing? 38% of the stuff we're doing isn't clearly linked to strategy. That's waste. So a key thing for project leaders today is to find tangible connection between strategic intent and action, right? And so this becomes really critical. It becomes even more critical when you see that 41% of projects are failing due to changes in strategy. So if the strategy is changing more frequently, and we are already at a place where 38% of what we do isn't even in line with strategy, we now have an even bigger problem. And this is the kind of problem that requires design thinking. It doesn't require, working harder on projects, but actually thinking about the design of how we implement projects so that they can deal with this rapid pace of shifting directions inside organizations. Yeah. So design thinking for results is about applying, what we learned in Silicon Valley about making nice iPads through understanding, empathizing with the needs of our clients or our stakeholders internally, and reconfiguring, choreographing work so that we can deliver against it, applied here so that we can close that strategy execution gap. Got it. Absolutely.
So design thinking is not just about shiny new objects.
Not at all. It's about designing work systems. It's about designing workflow. Got it. Now, from the self perspective, we know that 61% of CEOs are worried about the strategy execution gap. The key here is you've got to influence the work that's already in flow. So let's role play a little bit. Okay. We've now shifted strategy. Right. You're working on a project. You've got your Gantt charts up on the wall. You are on time, on budget. Everything's great. That project you're working on is in that 38%. It is no longer strategic. We have to have a conversation that we should kill it.
Well, absolutely we need to kill it.
Yeah.
But are there pressures inside the organization?
And my KPIs are tied to that. So how do we actually have the influence to make sure that the portfolio we're working with is still aligned, and then have the difficult conversations? You and I might be at the same hierarchical level. How do we do that? You do that through influence. That's how you do it. Yeah. The next is 40% of project failures are attributed to reprioritization. So how do you have the agility on the other side to deliver against it? So how do you know how to reconfigure the work? Well, companies exist to create value. So you have to be able to tangibly put value on these things in order to prioritize and reconfigure what matters most. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, it's about dollars. You have to figure that out.
Wasn't it Drucker who said that?
Drucker has said a lot of very good things.
Yeah,
a lot of very good things. All right, from a self perspective, we know 81% of complex projects are due to leadership, but we have to put a finer point on leadership, right? Leadership, big deal. Leadership, what does that mean? In this context, when you have to manage up and try to keep working to align with strategy, there's no way that you can do all the work yourself. So the key thing in leadership is how do you build diverse, distributed, and highly effective teams that can essentially be autonomous, right? That they know what they're doing and they can do the work without you having to be in there all the time. And there's lots of control issues in that. There's lots of things we have to learn about that.
Yeah. We're even learning that on the development of our program.
Absolutely. Yeah. We are living in a complex world, aren't we? Now, underneath the leadership development stuff, well, guess what? It's all about change. The interesting thing about change here, though, is change for change's sake. Yeah, that's change management. This here is about building responsiveness, resilience, and adaptability. So how do you actually increase the change responsiveness in an organization? And then how do you drive and influence that change through it? And how do you do that in a place where engagement is 15% and where people don't care anymore?
And how do you do that in a place where people actually have brains that act as a resistor to the change that's being brought to them?
Because it's not familiar to me. It's not how we've done it before.
Right.
So these are pretty serious leadership challenges that have to be overcome. And if we net them all out, at the end of the day, what have we done? We've presented evidence that says project management's on the rise. That's great. We've presented evidence that leaders are looking to project leadership to deliver on strategic initiatives. The current way that we do things in project leadership has to remain true to its core, but reach out to the edge. That's where the stretch comes from complexity. And leadership is the key lever to get it done. So what are the leadership challenges? Making sense of the complex context is number one, because if you don't know how the system works, you don't know where to spend your attention. The second is managing the stakeholder list. We know this. There are far more of them, right? So if you're just going to brute force it and try to talk to everyone, there's not enough hours in a day. You have to get smart about who really matters in this ecosystem to get it to work. Aligning strategy with work, if there's 38% mess and fluff in there already and strategies are going to be revectored in 41% of the problems, you're going to have to be much more agile in managing up and understanding the tea leaves of where strategy is going. Applying design thinking to thinking about how we actually do this work to close that gap, as opposed to just brute force traditional, culture structure stuff is really important. Building the influence required to have the tough conversations about what work will we stop, and understanding how to value this work so that we know what to reconfigure to deliver optimal value.
Not just money.
Not just money.
Different metrics as well.
Yeah. Both you and I have a CFO.
Yes, we do.
Who remind us on quarterly bases that it's how we keep count, right? And you can't, if you have to do all those 6 things, you can't do all the work yourself. You have to build distributed and diverse teams because work is much more distributed, and you have to get their hearts. You have to drive change in a way that motivates them to unlock their discretionary effort. Because most organizations today that are working in a world that's dynamic, that is fueled by discretionary effort. What people will do for you that they don't have to do.
Exactly.
And that's key.
Exactly.
So all we got to do is that.
That's it.
And if we do that, we build the leadership capability, right, to deal with complexity, to close the strategy execution gap. And that's why strategy execution and Duke are in partnership.
Absolutely. And this is essentially why we've come together to address these 8 challenges. And we'll come back. I want everybody on the webinar to remember these 8 challenges because we're going to come back and construct something around them as well.
Mm-hmm.
Shall we talk about our partnership?
Yeah, sure.
I know that I can speak for strategy execution and say that we are so excited to be working with Duke University, Duke VUCA, and Duke Corporate Education. We're real excited about being with you on this journey. And let's talk a little bit about what we bring to the table individually and then corporately. First of all, strategy execution. I know that as an instructor for strategy execution, since about 1992, 93 timeframe, I have been teaching courses in the project management space, program management space, a bit in the business skills space. We also have curricula around Agile and Lean, business analysis, and so forth. So
this is your area.
This is what strategy execution is all about. But we recognize that strategy execution has a gap between strategy and execution, and we've been able to do some work within that, but we really wanted to leverage that out into a relationship with you all a bit more. We're global, 17 cities. We've got locations in a bunch of instructors, 500 or more, around the globe, and a bunch of different ways that folks can get access to the content that we provide around these curricula that we've got. You know, from in-classroom to virtual classroom to e-learning / online and so forth. A lot of different ways that folks can get at this material. What about Duke?
From Duke's perspective, I mean, look, there's kind of 3 key players here, if you will. There's Duke University,
right?
I think consistently ranked as one of the world's top universities. The mission, and I've been in the Duke ecosystem for 12, 13 years now. So I've been stewing in it long enough to really believe fervently in its mission. So Duke's mission is knowledge and service of society. The university exists essentially to disseminate knowledge and service of society, not just on a business level. Obviously, we have med school, law school, engineering school, so on and so forth. But it's a core mission that's what we want to do. From the VUCA School of Business, where I've been on faculty and now have a joint appointment, it's about building leaders of consequence. So consequential leadership is what we worry about, and we feel that the next decade will probably be one of the most consequential decades outside the world wars for leadership. Don't get me started on how we're lacking in leadership around the world today, just in terms of sheer numbers. But that's for another webinar.
Yes.
But the VUCA School of Business is absolutely focused on building leaders of consequence and doing it in a much more collaborative way. And we've also really extended our global footprint. So we've opened a university, Duke Kunshan University in China. I've just come back from Singapore. So we recognize that the world doesn't rotate around Durham, North Carolina, and that a lot of things are happening outside the United States. And we need to be part of that discourse. Our dean, Bill Boulding, talks about you have to be embedded and connected. You can't study things from afar. You must be there. And so that's very much part of our ethos at the VUCA School. Through corporate education, we are singularly focused on getting leaders ready for what's next in the business context. So leadership teams who need to solve problems like how do I close the strategy execution gap, that's what we do. We focus primarily on helping leaders deal with issues and bring research and bring instruction and bring novel design to solve that problem.
Gotcha. Okay. Footprint around the globe.
Not unlike you. In fact, when we started looking at our partnership, we were like, wow, we have offices in the same places too. So we delivered in over 75 countries. We have about 1,500 global educators because we've been working at this for about 15 years and 17 years now. We've delivered about 7,500 programs. Anytime, anywhere in the world, any day, there's at least 3 Duke C programs going on. They're going on right now. I just couldn't tell you where they are. And we've got closer now to about 250,000 alumni, if you want to talk about it that way, people who've been through our program.
Unbelievable.
So on our side, on the Duke side of things, look, we've got top-notch research. The VUCA School of Business is #1 in research productivity. We at Duke CE, working with faculty, have a faculty-led model. We work with the faculty who have the IP, and we turn that into valuable and useful information and activities around an issue, like strategy execution, Of course, there'll be a certification process that comes with this.
Yes.
And the other thing we're really well known is for cutting-edge learning methodologies. We like to take the practical and the academic and put it together into an experience that's meaningful.
Okay. And then on the 2080 strategy execution side, over the years have developed lots and lots of IP around those traditional
100%.
areas of project-based work. Deep experience in that project-based work world. I know that that's the world that I come from, that enables me to be able to be in the classroom and work with people in that regard. Lots of great facilitators just like you. Not as many as you, but we
cover many domains.
Yes. And then also the global reach. And so what we get out of all of this together, this sort of synergistic effect, this partnership right here, yes, shaking hands, is, you know, a sort of an exponential result. 1 + 1 = orange.
Yeah.
That,
like that.
That takes us away from just the standard linear algorithm and moves us into a completely different world where, you know, the program is going to equip those people coming through, the leaders, because that leadership is a lever for evolving challenges in the project-based world with respect to the volatility, the uncertainty, and the complexity that we see. Lots of different modalities. We'll be getting to that a little bit later on as we talk about the program as well, that people can gain access to this material. A certificate from Duke VUCA school for those folks that have gone through the entire curriculum that we're getting ready to define here in just a minute. But most importantly, organizations can count on there being a cadre of leaders coming back from this educational experience, this movement from knowledge into some kind of understanding that hopefully will translate into some kind of wisdom back in the workplace for improved performance and results.
Yeah, and so you know, we have a term at Duke we use a lot that's pracademic.
Yes.
We want to bring the practical needs that you have a very solid
We're very practical.
The academic research that we understand, and then tailor that.
Absolutely.
To solve the problem of how do we build leadership capability to deal with complexity to close the strategy execution gap. That's why we're here.
That's right.
What we're here to do.
And there could be other dimensions, different gaps that we're going to try to close in different programs, but the strategy execution gap is what we're here to talk about. So let's talk about how we're going to do that. And our response to that?
Our response to this big challenge.
To this challenge. If you'll recall, thinking back several slides ago to the 8 different challenges that Tony laid out as a result of the comprehensive research that he's been able to put together to show in such a cogent way, is a program that is practical in nature. Matter of fact, they're tangible. You can touch them. You can go to them. You can experience them. You can see both of us in the classroom. And so if you think about those 8 challenges that Tony spoke to earlier, we're going to, what we were faced with as we came together as a partnership 6 months ago or thereabouts, was to first identify what these challenges were,
right,
and then to turn them into questions. For instance, if you took each one of these challenges and you put the word how in front of each one of these statements, we could say, for instance, how can we make sense of a complex context within which the strategy must be executed? And it was the answer to that how question that we developed a series of courses.
That's right.
And if we think about the series of courses, what's really interesting is that we were able to develop a one-to-one relationship between a challenge and a course, because each one of these challenges demands a certain amount of knowledge, a certain amount of exercises and case studies and so forth in order to be able to address the how question that each one of these challenges presents to us.
Yeah, and so we really try to frame it around the doing.
Absolutely.
You know, it's what do I need to do as a leader at any level where I'm overseeing projects in the organization in order to deal with the reality of complexity.
Yes.
And so you can ask that question at a project executive level, you can answer it as a head of strategy or a CIO level, as well as you can answer it if you're
all the way down to the individual contributor level.
That's right. So even if you're working in a project and you've just got your iron triangle on a particular project, that project itself is not immune from complexity.
Correct. And because the size of the project is not necessarily a measure of the complexity, there are a lot of other variables that we have to take into account. And so, and also, and I think an important point that you made is, it's a how question, which infers doing, as opposed to a what question that really is inferring knowing more than anything else. So, you know, it's a knowing and a doing at the same time.
That was the design intent. Yeah.
So Tony, help me out here. So for instance, if I'm answering the question, how can I align strategy with work activity to reduce the strategy execution performance gap, and we had to develop a course out of that, what would you suspect that the name of that course might be?
Ooh, I might call it something like aligning work with strategy.
That's about the way it turned out. Same thing with each one of these questions, so that as we take a look at, for instance, making sense of complexity, how to do that in the context that we've been speaking of, we have a course called Making Sense of Complexity.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's profound.
It's beyond profound to its simplest form. For instance, if you take the design thinking challenge, you know, how do we innovate in an organization and not just at the product level, so that we can apply design thinking to improve strategy execution results? Name of that program?
Design Thinking for Results.
Absolutely, and on, so that as we take a look at each one of these courses, you will see that we have essentially reflected the challenge in the name of the course.
Yeah.
That keeps it much simpler for us as we're developing these things, so that we know which course we're going to be working on, which challenge we're trying to address. But hopefully it'll also make it easier for folks that really want to learn about this to be able to access the information more easily and engage with the program a little bit more.
I think that's right. I mean, I think we've always found that when you're trying to marry practical and academic, that, you know, us academics, we like topics and data, and I unfortunately dragged you through some data, but that's how we operate. People who are executives are busy and they've only got so much attention to spend, so they just want to know, sometimes they don't want instruction, they just want instructions. So by orienting it around what do I have to do rather than what I have to know, you'll always have to know more, right?
That'll never
go. Let's orient it around what we really need to do differently given this new reality.
Exactly.
That seemed to be the best way to structure.
And that was the underlying structural theme for each one of these 8 courses. And a couple of points that I'd like to make about the curriculum that you have in front of you. This shows not only the 8 courses that are currently making up the curriculum, but it also shows a path towards certification, Tony. And we spent a lot of time making sure that we've got the right courses and the right pathway in order to get this certificate from VUCA. There are 2 required courses, and then there are 6 elective courses from which a student can take 4 in order to get the certificates. Or if you want to base it on colors?
Yeah, you take both orange,
right?
4 of the blue.
Right, and that's what you got to remember. 4 of those 6 blue, you're good. And a couple of other points that I want to make. There are a couple of issues around the modalities. Let me talk about modality here for just a minute. We have what we call an on-site modality, which is essentially instructor-led, ILT, instructor-led training, on-site at corporations, 3 days in length, in the classroom, typically 8:30 to 4:30, that kind of time frame. So it's also available for continuing education units or PDUs, whatever classification you need. We also have a modality that's on campus.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that real quickly, the on-campus.
On campus, so you know, on-site would be for companies to say, wow, if we really are looking to elevate our leadership, project leadership capability for strategic initiatives inside an organization, it might be far more efficient to work through your own context and your own issues with a set of people,
yes,
right, who lead projects in your organization. That's on-site. On campus is more for my own development, right? I might want to do this, right? Or I might be testing out whether or not I want to bring this to my organization.
That's right.
And the benefit of on campus is, well, number one, we have closer proximity to those doing research, and number two is I get to meet with other folks who are facing similar challenges, but perhaps from other industries.
Exactly.
They both have absolute benefit, but they are different offerings.
And you missed probably the most important benefit of all of being on campus. It's Durham, North Carolina.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Fall and spring. Can't beat it.
Can't beat it here in North Carolina. So with the online then, we also, or with the on-campus, we've also got an online modality, which will allow an asynchronous approach. Basically, there might be some twists to that as well, but an asynchronous approach to the content as it appears in different locales, typically on campus as well. And we've got a virtual instructor-led training modality as well for those situations where either the instructor or students or a combination of both can't be in the same place in a classroom at a corporate site somewhere.
One of the things we know for sure, and I know you know it from strategy execution, is the demand for this kind of development is really high, but sometimes the barrier is mobility.
Absolutely.
So we have to, our purpose as an organization is to get leadership ready for what's next. If we cut off the opportunity for people to get access, we're not fulfilling our purpose. So we have to apply design thinking to understand
Absolutely
where the needs are, and so the multi-channel is the way to go.
And to do some of our own work around making sure that our platforms allow for the agility of others.
Exactly right.
So let's grab some questions. I'm sure there are lots of questions that have come in here. Well, I know one person who's not confused, and that's the person we're about to introduce. What I'd like to do is get us into a question and answer session, and on your screen you'll see a new and fresh face that will help us to answer and address some of the questions that I'm sure that you've been sending in. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you, Tony, for leading us through all of that brilliant research that would lead us to the shared point of view that we've got around the program that we've developed. What I'd also like to do at this point, too, is I'd like to welcome Dr. Ed Barrows, who also is part of Duke Corporate Education. And Ed's responsible for designing and delivering programs for a portfolio of global clients as a managing director at Duke Corporate Education. Welcome, Ed, and I'm sure you've got some questions for us today.
Hi, Jonathan, Tony, and everyone else participating from hither and yon. Yes, indeed, we do have a few questions for you today. Although that explanation that you provided throughout was rather in-depth, I do have a few things that I think are on people's minds. And speaking of in-depth, there were a lot of courses in that curriculum. There's a couple of required courses, certainly to get people grounded in complexity and understand aligning work with strategy, some deep dives on influencing without authority. But what if someone doesn't want to necessarily take all the courses? Is it possible just to take one or two? Maybe we could clarify that.
Absolutely, Ed. Thanks for the question. While this shows a path for a certificate from Duke VUCA School of Business for 6 courses, there is nothing to say that somebody within an organization or a portion of the organization just goes through a couple of these courses, or they combine a couple of these courses with courses from other curricula within strategy execution in order to develop and fulfill their own requirements for their own development within the organization that they work in. Next question, Ed.
Right level of the course is I think a question on people's minds. You know, let's say I'm a junior practitioner, I'm just starting on projects, or maybe I'm a very senior practitioner, I've been working on projects for many years, I've got the PMP certification. You know, what's the right level, I guess, in an organization for this? I think we touched on it. I think, Tony, you said from sort of the senior levels to the junior levels, but what's the sweet spot for this particular course?
I think part of this, the issue that we found out, as you know well with Duke CE, is that I think sometimes we rotate on levels of hierarchy, and what we're finding more and more, particularly in complex projects, that leadership really has to operate as a system. I mean, we tend to break down how we teach people into senior vice president, galactic vice president, super galactic, intergalactic vice president, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then we say, you know what, because these people are super smart, we'll give them the harder stuff. And then the work actually gets done with a deep soil sample, as Michael Chavez, our CEO, likes to say. So I think actually having if I could imagine the Aligning Work with Strategy course in the week of September 11th at Duke, I think it would be great if we had folks who had, you know, gotten through their PMP, were pretty much well ensconced in doing the work, and were looking to reach to the next level. Because, as I said earlier, they're not immune from complexity, and they can still apply it at their level. And what they learn will be applicable at their level, just as it will if you're trying to revector a strategy. So I think we tried to engineer this thing in such a way that it can accommodate the span from I'm managing project portfolio all the way up to I'm driving strategic initiative, because the focus on it is about how do we address the complex nature of the work.
Within a project-based work world.
100%.
So
it's all about project-based work.
To augment what you've just said, Tony, Ed, I believe that all of those are true, and we can put a qualifier on it that says folks that are engaged in the leading at whatever level of any kind of project-based work within the organization, that could be strategic in nature, that could almost even be tactical in nature as well. So
well, tactical project work it's not immune from complexity either.
Absolutely not. So next question, Ed.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it definitely targets more of sort of where people are working, not organizationally, but conceptually in terms of the level of complexity. And as you pointed out, I think made a very strong case for it. That level of complexity is growing and has grown and will continue to grow in the future. Interesting anecdote. Yesterday I was on Amazon looking at leadership books and leadership topics, and I noticed that the PMBOK guide of all books happened to show up as one of the top books in the leadership category. You know, if I were a PMP, or I guess I were sitting for that exam or had recent experience with the content within the PMBOK guide, I guess I might say to myself, well, what do I need beyond that? Isn't that really enough for me if I've got this certification? You know, you talked a lot about leadership and how important it is and failure rates, but you know, what am I going to get out of this, I guess, beyond what I would be expected to achieve as part of my PMP certification?
Can I start with that and then you can follow up? Having earned a PMP myself and gone through that, I will first say to all of the people that are listening that you should be prepared for a new PMBOK guide to be coming out in the near future, which will be changing the exam, so that you'll want to be prepared for that as well in case you have to take the exam sometime soon. That being said, what isn't spoken about within the Project Management Institute's body of knowledge, regardless of the version or edition of it, is about mindsets. And that's what really differentiates. There is no knowledge area within the PMBOK that's called leadership. They're all X management. And so what we're talking here about, that leadership is a lever, it's a mindset. Yes, there are tool sets and there are skill sets, which would be applicable with the PMBOK world as well. But this is something that helps people equip themselves for not just managing, but navigating the complexity that we're seeing.
I can't touch that.
Jeff?
What he said.
No, that was a very thoughtful answer. Clearly, someone that's got a lot of experience, both with the sort of certification side as well as the practical side. So, just as we come up on the top of the hour, want to be mindful of time. And just one last thing, maybe you could do a little bit of a deeper dive. You know, you hit the high level on a couple of the courses. Maybe you could pick out one or two of the more innovative topic areas, such as design thinking for results, and tell us a little bit about that, how the participants are going to engage with that material and what they're going to get out of that that's a little bit different than what they might normally see as part of a, say, project management curriculum.
Great. So yeah, design thinking obviously has a lot of wood behind it from all the work that's been done out in Silicon Valley to do things like cook up iPads, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really a way of framing and a way of thinking. I would argue that design thinking for results and making sense of complexity probably are pretty well interconnected. But at Duke Corporate Education, we've been doing a lot of work on this in leading in context. And what we found is for leaders who are the most successful in leading in any context, in this case we're talking about a complex context, they kind of have to do three things. And these are what we call sensibilities, not competencies, because they're context dependent. They have to get better at perceiving things and not assuming that they know what they look like. Because I might have been, as you and I, with our gray hair, I might have been in a situation 20 years ago when I was at IBM, and I encounter it now and I say, I know exactly what this is and I know what to do. The likelihood of me being wrong is very high right now because the context, over here I was on solid ground, over here I'm not. Right. So perceiving is really important. To ask yourself, am I really seeing this the right way or do I have blinders on? Once you see a problem differently, which is a lot of what design thinking is about, is empathize. In the customer context, you empathize with the customer. You'd have to empathize with multiple stakeholders. inside and outside the organization deliver value. The second is sense making. In a complex world, complex is not the same as complicated. In a complicated world, you can do a work breakdown structure and you can allocate probability to figure out path dependency to get to a certain outcome. In a complex world, you can't, because a complex world is emergent. So therefore, when you pull the string, you know, the butterfly flaps its wings and there's a tornado on the other side of the planet. Everything's interconnected, so it's very hard to do a work breakdown structure. So in that world, you have to sense make rather than just make sense, and that's different. Yep. And the last thing is, from a design thinking for results, is you have to choreograph. In the past, you used to control. Now you have to choreograph. You have to choreograph resource. You have to choreograph capability. You have to choreograph partnerships. And you have to make that all dance in an ecosystem that creates, delivers, and captures more value than your competition. So design thinking for results is not about how do I make a better iPad, but it's how do I perceive, sense, make, and choreograph as a leader to ensure that I pay attention in the right way, in the right places, at the right time to close the strategy execution gap.
And design thinking for results has got a slightly different approach in the classroom, does it not?
Yes. Oh, yeah. So it's all doing. So we will be, yeah, we'll be solving.
Very workshoppy.
100% workshop.
Yeah. And that will be.
You can't learn design thinking. It's like, how did you learn how to kiss?
Not with you.
But seriously,
yeah,
it's something.
Gentlemen, unfortunately, that's all we have time for.
Yes, pull us off. To learn how to ride a bike, you must ride a bike.
Yes.
To learn how to do design thinking for results, you have to ride the bike.
You've got to get there.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that sounds not only innovative, actually pretty fun. So thank you very much. That'll handle it from here for our questions, and I'll turn it back over to you, Jonathan, to wrap things up.
Thank you so much, Ed, and again, thank you for being involved in the webinar today. I appreciate it. Let me close by giving a big thank you. Again,
pleasure having
you. To you, Dr. O'Driscoll, to you, Dr. Barrow, and to the rest of the Duke organization that we've been so fortunate being able to work with.
Likewise.
Unfortunately, since we have run out of time, just a couple of details that I'd like to move your way as we're closing up. We're real excited about partnering with Duke University and with VUCA and with Duke Corporate Education. We're looking forward to allowing this program to evolve, learn, and grow itself. And if you're looking for more information, you can see on the screen there about the program. For instance, a more deep dive on any of the courses that we talked about or any of the other aspects of the program, you can go to StrategyEx.com. That's StrategyEx.com. And with that, I'd like to say thank you and look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you.